The U.S. Marshals Service had a busy year, arresting no less than 73,000 fugitives in 2023, and it concluded a multi-agency operation focusing on violent fugitives and drug pushers that had 600 arrests alone. Here with an update, the director of the U.S. Marshals Service, Ronald Davis. Mr. Davis, good to have you with us.
Thank you, Thomas. Good to be with you.
And I want to start with that number of 73,000 fugitives. Was that up from the year before, down? What are the trends here in arrests that you are obligated to make every year?
So that would be slightly down, but I think for us, Tom, we look at what the 73,000 represents. So, for example, in that number is close to 6,000 homicide suspects, some 10,000 people associated with gangs. And equally important is that that number represents really great coordination with our state and local partners. In other words, it is really data-driven. We're focusing on, as you've maybe heard the Attorney General talk about, focusing on the drivers of violent crime. That in most communities, a handful of people that are exacting a lot of violence, terrorizing the community. So we work with our state and locals to target them so that we can remove them when they have warrants from the community. When I look at that number, I just see a lot of great work that the deputies and our task force officers are doing.
And how does the decision get made as to who does an arrest in a given case? Why the U.S. Marshals Service and not, the New Hampshire State Police, for example? That's
a great question. And since 2000, there was an act passed, a Presidential Threat Act, that gave us authorization for the United States Marshals Service. And the key word is to assist our state and local partners with the execution of their warrants. And so that request comes from the local agency. It would be that local PD, that state police, that's usually working in partnership with us on a daily basis anyway, saying, these are the warrants we would want your assistance in. And a part of that, Tom, as you know, a lot of crime now, and especially those that are trying to evade capture, respect no boundaries. So they'll move and hide all over the country and the globe. And they know we have the resources to track them across the United States, and we have tentacles all over the globe so that we can find them. So it starts with the local agency asking us, will you help us with this warrant? And then we basically partner with them to find that fugitive.
And how do the cases get divided up, say, between immigration cases, where it would be ICE, and some communities don't cooperate with ICE, versus the Marshals Service? Because any of these gang members, you mentioned 10,000 of them, we know that among the people coming illegally, there are some gang members in there.
So we don't track our fugitives. Our warrants are not based on immigration status. So, for example, if the local PD says they're looking for a homicide suspect, what we would focus on is that the person is wanted for a homicide suspect, who he or she is, and then start the investigation to find that. But it's not based on immigration status. I think for us, we just don't track that number. We track the offense, and if the agency is asking us for assistance for that clearance, we will then help recover that fugitive.
All right. And when you do arrest someone, where do they go? Do they go to federal facilities or to the local or state facilities? What happens to them when you nab somebody?
So a little bit of both. We have two types of warrants that we will serve. The federal warrants are those that we are by statute are mandatory to execute on behalf of the court. So the court issues a warrant, a federal warrant, and then the Marshals Service helps retrieve those fugitives or apprehend them, and then we would bring them to federal court where they would then be in our custody until some type of adjudication of the case. For the local and state, it depends. If we find them in a local community, we would turn them over to the local agency doing the investigation or the local jail so they can be processed through the state. If they're in a different state, then we would put them in the local jail in that state, and then it's up to that agency then to work out the extradition between states. So pretty much, if I were to summarize it, our local and state warrants go back to the agency that issued the warrant, and the federal ones would come into the custody of the United States Marshals Service and the various facilities that we have around the country.
It sounds like this can be dangerous work because you're not arresting wallflowers that go willingly all the time.
No, I would say no, we're not arresting wallflowers. Yes, it's heckin' dangerous in the sense that you're right. When you talk about 6,000 homicide suspects, robbery suspects, people involved in the narcotic trade, unfortunately, that's a lot of high-risk activity. And recently we just did a 3-year review of our officer-involved shootings, our deadly encounters. And during that period of time, we had 47 separate incidents in which deputies, task force officers were shot at, came under gunfire. I've been the director for 2 years, a little bit over 2 years now, and maybe 2 weeks from now I will visit a sheriff's deputy that was shot and injured, and that will be the 8th task force officer, deputy, or local officer that I will visit as a director that have been shot and wounded in the line of duty executing the warrants or the marshal's mission. So it is very, very dangerous. It is therefore, as a director, my number one priority is to make sure that the officer safety, morale, and wellness is there, because our deputies and our admin professionals, we cannot take care of the American people if we don't take care of them first. And I think we have to make sure that they're safe, strong, well, and supported in order to serve the American people.
We're speaking with Ronald Davis. He's director of the U.S. Marshals Service. And what are some of your HR challenges? I mean, different agencies have problems hiring people, retaining people. What's it like for the Marshals? What are your priorities there?
So I think it'd be fair to say that recruitment is a little bit more challenging today than it was when I first came in some years ago. I'm an age myself, and I became a cop in 1985 in the beautiful city of Oakland. But although with the challenges, we still have a pretty high interest. People still want to be a deputy U.S. Marshal. They want to be part of the Marshal family. Our retention is very good, that people, once they come here, they become part of the family, and many, not most, will retire. I think the challenge for us moving forward is making sure that we stay attractive to a new generation, making sure that we can respond to the needs of a new generation, making sure that the agency maintains a high-quality candidate, a very diverse candidate pool that we should take advantage of, and making sure that we're prepared for the challenges of tomorrow. If there was one thing that frustrates me the most time, it would be we do sometimes move at the speed of government, and which means we can go relatively slow. And so we always are looking for ways to make it more efficient, but we have to do so without compromising the vetting process or the quality of deputies we're bringing in. We have the most bright, intelligent, critical thinkers in the profession, and I don't want to do anything to compromise that, so that does take time. But other than that, I think we are doing well. We are hiring, we are reducing our vacancies, and we are continuing to build a workforce that is doing a tremendous job.
And one increasing demand on the Marshals Service has been to guard judges, because I guess it's a sign of some larger ill in society that judges are less safe than they used to be, and there's been some lurid incidents there. And what's your sense of what's going on there? And then I have a follow-up question on law enforcement itself.
So the current threat environment, I just recently had the ability to speak in front of our House Judiciary Committee, the subcommittee on crime and surveillance, and I'll share with you what I shared with them. I am deeply concerned about the increases of threats against our judges and court officials. In fact, over the last 3 years, it has more than doubled. The concern is such that I would have to say that the current and evolving threat environment constitutes a substantial risk to our democracy. We cannot have a judiciary that cannot operate independent and operate under the threat of violence. And so it is a top priority. We are now putting more resources to attack this than we have in most people's memories that have been here, because it is that critical to our democracy. And so it is more than doubled, is problematic. And what we're seeing with the nature of it is also concerning, is that we're seeing more and more people resulting to either violent rhetoric or actually acts of violence because they're opposing a court decision, an opinion, a government action. And I'm just going to kind of paraphrase Dr. King, if I may. It seems like we have not learned how to disagree without being violently disagreeable. And we need to get back to some levels of civility. We need to get back to acknowledging that words matter, especially for those people that carry influence to others. That comments made, even if they're not threats themselves, but they're violent rhetoric, they're targeting individuals. Sometimes people act by themselves to take that on, and it turns into threats and violence. So it is a top priority for the Marshals Service.
And I think it's fair to say that in the last few recent years, there's been a terrible diminution of respect for law enforcement itself in the country. You say you became a cop in '85. Well, I'm quite a bit older. And I remember, if the cop looked at you cross-eyed, you pulled your car over in town because he'd call your dad if you were speeding, that type of thing. But how does that affect the Marshal Service? And what do you see the trends in police respect and law enforcement respect?
So I'll start with the safety part, if I may. I'm definitely seeing an increase in assaults and attacks on law enforcement. I think we're seeing that across the board, although we're starting to see some promising declines over the last year or so. But we're starting to see it. We definitely see an increase over the past few years, and this is why we have to invest heavily in officer safety, in training, and equipment, and technology, find all ways possible to make it safer, to reduce that risk. We cannot eliminate the risk, and I think our deputies and law enforcement officers all over the country acknowledge the inherent risk that goes with the job, but we can do everything in our power to reduce that risk and mitigate the risk, if you will. With regards to respect, I think what that offers right now is not just a challenge, but I would submit that it offers a unique opportunity. It is an opportunity for us to engage our communities, to show our communities what value we bring to them, how we can enhance